SHMACKEMAGOB, everybody, bang, bang, pizza skulls. Look who I got with me, Mr. Martin Popoff. Again, thank you so much for coming back, Martin.
Yes, no worries, Ralph. Always a good time.
I gotta say, I am so what our subject is today. I'm so intrigued because we had a little discussion on this because I made a little post about Jimi Hendrix, and then you were kind enough to send me a text. But then I was like, no, I want to buy this. So I read it from cover to cover, and I wanted to not stump you, but to give you my opinions on who started metal. But man, I would say 99% of what I was going to tell you is in the book, except for one little thing, which you may have mentioned, but I don't think you did, because this book goes all the way up to Sabbath. Am I correct?
It ends at the end of 1971.
Okay, yes. There is something that happened after 71 I want to discuss when we get there.
Okay.
But I did take notes so I don't forget anything.
Okay.
Not to give away anything in the book, but just things that very much intrigued me. What you said, you did bring up Wagner, Ride of the Valkyries, which I have said before. I said that's pretty much the birth of metal right there. I mean, a lot of people would say Robert Johnson, the blues, which is very integral in the components of metal. But do you feel the same? I know you mentioned in the book, but do you feel the same way? I mean, I remember watching Apocalypse Now saying, man, that's metal to classical music. Wouldn't you agree?
Yes. So this is kind of a little crazy and hard. I can probably go all over the place, and I'll try to rein myself in. But yeah, this book is 120,000 words that ends in 1971. So it's a big, long book. It's about a book and a half. It's very small text and a lot of cool pictures and stuff. So there are probably, and I wrote it quite a while ago, so I'm kind of going from memory here. I didn't kind of redo my notes. I actually got this cool thing where I was able to do a presentation on this book on a week's all expenses paid trip to Finland to speak at a metal conference. So that was really cool. So I wish I had my slides ready and all that for you, and I could have given you the short story. But just to keep things short, there are probably 15 different ways that classical is looked at in this book as well, and another probably 25 ways that the blues are looked at in this book. So yes, you're right. But there's all that stuff that Blue Oyster Cult manager and theorist and philosopher Sandy Pearlman used to talk about as well, about Bruckner and, and more dissident, more violent and aggressive classical music as you move on. And just classical in general, and theater, and the walls of Jericho in Egypt, and crazy violin players like Paganini, and selling your soul to the devil, and all this kind of stuff, and the birth of horror movies. So there's a lot of different references. I guess what I do, I just was looking at this early, I've split it into kind of four neat little areas. Chapter 1, trace elements, 1250 BC to 1966. Chapter 2, lead, 1967 to 69. Chapter 3, steel, 1970. And chapter 4, titanium, 1971. So I won't blab on any further. I'll let you talk.
No, I want to touch upon the elements of what led to metal, and some things I didn't know because I'm not that much of a historian. The part where you talk about how the Greek and Romans pretty much invented rock and roll shows. Instead of lights, they had torches and screaming, and it was kind of like that's kind of like a part of what would later become heavy metal shows.
Yeah, there's a guy who's done, forgive me, I can't remember his name, but I had to interview him when we did Metal Evolution. And Metal Evolution, a lot of the concepts we came up with and dealt with in that banger series. But there's a guy who, interesting story where he goes through all that, and I believe he's done an entire book on the Greeks and the Romans and the invention of heavy metal in that way. And I guess the general sense is all these things I mentioned, plus what you just mentioned, the philosophical sort of underpinnings of that, all that is extremity in music, in extremity in vocals, extremity in crowd reaction. Like they talk about, I talk about in here, the idea of going to see theater, in medieval times and all that, when it was a real kind of working class, lower class thing where, there would be pits, like essentially the birth of the mosh pit comes from old, going to see theater shows and stuff. Whereas classical was more of an upper end thing. But yes, the idea of extremity in vocals, in instrumentation, in what happens in the crowd, in themes, all of that is part of the lead up, before we even get to the blues.
And even non-music subjects like the Bible and the Vikings of the 10th century plays an intricate part in the themes of a lot of metal.
That's right. Thanks for reminding me. So there is all this stuff about music used in war or to scare your enemies. And even when we did Metal Evolution, I talked to a couple of army generals and stuff about that, scaring the enemy in or making them talk, using music as torture, but even just the idea of the piper in front of an army leading troops into battle, or making super loud, scary sounds to scare your enemy over the hill. Vikings and Viking, yelling and music, and you're right, all of that matters as well.
Yes, and also like composers like Johann Sebastian Bach were very influential on Blackmore and Yngwie Malmsteen. But the one thing I thought I was going to get you on, but I didn't, because it's in the book, was I was going to bring up Bill Haley's Rock Around the Clock, which you do mention. And I think that may be, correct me if I'm wrong, in case you know of something else, the first song with like a shreddy guitar solo.
Interesting. I don't quite remember that. To tell you what I kind of do remember about the 50s end of it. So there's that sort of thing. There's early uses of distortion, early uses of feedback, early extreme vocals like Little Richard yelling, Tutti Frutti and all that. There's Rocket 88 people talk about. But one thing I do kind of stress is that there's the Johnny Burnett trio version of Train Kept a Rollin', which I consider the first heavy metal song in a way, because it has a number of things going for it. And I'm not sure if there's guitar solo in there. I really want to go listen to the one you just brought up. I don't know if I mentioned that particularly in the book, but the Train Kept a Rollin' has a semi-extreme vocal. It has distortion on the guitar. And what I like about it is, and it's a big premise of the book, is it's moving away from the blues per se. So it has a guitar riff that has some modernity to it. So it's moving away from regular rock and roll and the blues. There's still a blues structure to it, but it's a little meaner and different and more menacing. And my not to give everything away, but my whole point with picking Black Sabbath as the true absolute ground zero start, not ground zero, but the start as an album, more or less, but is the idea that once you remove the blues more or less completely from the equation, you have the birth of heavy metal.
That's true. And also I was not aware of Jimmy Preston's Rock This Joint. And I did look it up, and Bill Haley borrowed a lot from that song with the song Rock Around the Clock, because I hear it in the song.
Okay.
And also you were talking about Little Richard with the scream. Yeah, I guess that does predate the Beatles with Twist and Shout, which there's a lot of screaming in that song.
Exactly. The Beatles are super important. But yeah, I've just opened the book and I'll just rattle through really quickly. I'm looking at the 50s here, and for whatever reason, and I explain the reason I talk about these things, but the Dominoes, 60-Minute Man, we've got the Fender Precision Bass, we've got Rocket 88, we've got Tiny Bradshaw recording the first version of Train Kept a Rollin', we've got Lovin' Machine by Wynonie Harris, because okay, I don't know why. Jimmy Webster, Touch Method for electric and amplified Spanish guitar. We've got Pat Hare, we've got Bill Haley's Crazy Man Crazy. We've got the Hammond B3 being invented. Fender debuts the Stratocaster. Yeah, there's Rock Around the Clock. What do I say here? April 12th, 54, which is considered rock and roll, includes a fairly wild guitar solo for the day, played by Danny Cedrone. Some argue that this should be called the first rock song because Rocket 88 never really charted as a rock song, and Crazy Man Crazy is not heavy enough. So yeah, I always kind of explain why they're here. We've got Hammer Horror. into 55, we've got Chuck Berry's Maybelline. We've got Tutti Frutti. Richie Blackmore gets his first guitar in 1956. We've got Screamin' Jay Hawkins in 56 as well. So yeah, it goes on and on, pages and pages just for the 50s alone.
Yeah, and then going into the 60s with a lot of the proto metal, All Day and All the Night, the Kinks, which was 1964, and You Really Got Me, got very distorted solo. And a little later on, I saw an interview with Ronnie James Dio that what completely changed his, because we all know Ronnie and the Red Caps and all the things he did in the 50s, but it wasn't until he heard Eleanor Rigby, it totally changed his life, because here he is hearing a song about death and a lot of the components lyrically about what metal, the dark side of metal. And it was Eleanor Rigby that changed his way of thinking and his way of songwriting, which again, very important song.
That is really cool, because not only is it the lyric, it's the fact that the music is a little dark. So you go back. So this does not have particular the Diablos in Musica, the devil's tone, the tritone to it, but it does have a darkness to it. And also, as importantly, it's not blues or rock and roll based at all either. So it's moving forward that way. But yeah, just to recap as well, and not leave out the Beatles are also very important for being, for white guys with long hair, extreme vocals, use of feedback, use of distortion, and moving past the blues. They don't have a lot of blues, but they still have a fair bit of rock and roll, but they're starting to have pop structures that have neither in them. But Eleanor Rigby is important that way. And then of course, later on you get Helter Skelter, which is one of the first, pretty darn heavy early songs, 1968, right? I believe it is. And White Album, and a few other vestiges along the way. But even on that record, Birthday, why don't we do it in the road? There's some other fairly heavy things on there as well, but other guys are doing heavy stuff at that time too.
There's a riff, and everybody's got something to hide except me and my monkey, right? That's very thrashy, like with the crunch, which a lot of people point at Helter Skelter, which is very important, but nobody really talks about. I mean, as a whole, it's a very sporadic song. But if you cut down that little riff, that's kind of like, it's a thrash riff. But I want to talk about that later, because a lot of people point at Symptom of the Universe as like the first thrash song. But I think there's something that predates that I like to talk to you about, that I don't think I saw it in your book. Well, because it's not in your book, because it goes up to 71. But another thing that was very impressive in the book, I never heard of the Sonics. Did you know about the Sonics before you did this research?
Yeah, so there's a whole garage element to this as well, and there's a lot of garage bands like that. So garage is sort of, there's also kind of a section on surf. Surf's kind of important for the evolution of the guitar and the pictures and all that. But yeah, Sonics is pretty dark and pretty raunchy and heavy. Garage rock is known, it's called that because it's pretty distorted and dirty. It's kind of party music as well. Louie, all that is sort of important too. But yeah, just something else I don't want to forget. You did mention the Kinks. So there's all this apocryphal, there's Link Ray and there's Dave Davies and the way the stories work. And I'm kind of forgetting them exactly, but I think Link Ray is the knife through the cone, or the cone degraded on the speaker, and that caused distortion. One of these is the story goes that an amp fell off the back of a truck and broke the speaker. And Dave Davies, I think that's the one where there might be a deliberate slashing of the speaker cone with a razor blade to cause distortion. Yeah, like I say, I mean, I wrote the book probably almost 10 years ago now. So the exact details of some of these stories are a little all over the place, but there's also the invention of the distortion pedal right around this time, and you get a clear famous use of distortion pedal on Satisfaction, and then as the book says, that distortion pedal totally took off because of how famous Satisfaction was of the song.
I think 1966 is a very pivotal year, because that's when Hendrix came to play. And what is your opinion? Because this is my opinion when everybody points at Blue Cheer
Okay.
as Vincebus Ruptum was no, that's the first metal album, but I don't see anything different than that than what Hendrix was doing on Are You Experienced and Spanish Castle Magic and so on. I mean, do you see a difference?
Yeah, so as we move into that era, and Hendrix is broken down in a lot of detail in this thing, because I love the idea of, like, the whole thing set up as a timeline with quote situation, right? So I'm trying to find the firsts of everything, right? First time Hendrix gets here, first time he plays this live, first time he puts it on a single or a record. So super important is Hendrix. I think even I think it's obvious, but I think I really stress his importance even more because of definitely Purple Haze and Highway Child and what are the other heavy ones? Anyways, Cream as well, Manic Depression as well, Cream as well. But then Blue Cheer, I think the reason why, I mean, Are You Experienced is probably the most important album out of all of Hendrix and Cream combined. But then that Blue Cheer album is pretty darn heavy in a lot of ways. It's a power trio. It's made by these long-haired, drug-taken maniacs from San Francisco, who are the bad boys of the San Francisco scene, and looked as uncouth by the the singer-songwriter people on the Haight-Ashbury scene. But that record is even more extreme, more caveman-like, more distorted, more heaviness, mathematically speaking, than Are You Experienced. So that's why a lot of people will look at that as the first heavy metal album. I do call in this book, after all this 120,000 words, I do call Black Sabbath the first heavy metal album, because these preceding albums, like the first Blue Cheer, and people don't give enough credit to the second Blue Cheer as well, plus the MC5 live album, plus a little, well, I mean, back in the USA, no, but the first MC5 live album, and then definitely the first Stooges album, all of those are pretty heavy. But the reason I discount them a little bit compared to Sabbath is because they seem more like amped up, accidental garage rock made heavy. They seem accidental, basically. They don't seem like they're committed to the cause or truly knowing or conscious that they're creating something brand new. And I think that the real impressive brand newness and modernity of heavy metal happens on that first Black Sabbath album.
Yeah, I think maybe because Blue Cheer is considered is because the whole album is pretty loud. Yeah. And where Hendrix, he had Hey Joe and and Wind Cries Mary. But also in the book you talk about, Sandy Pearlman says no. Blue Cheer is the first metal, and in one of the Headbangers Journey, Geddy Lee said Blue Cheer is the first metal band, where Al Bashard said no, they were loud, but he feels like the Who were more metal than Blue Cheer. And the Who, going back to like My Generation, I mean, I feel like that may be a very big proto-punk song.
Yes, definitely. That's a great choice. And it's also a proto metal song. And the Who is super important in here because of Pete Townsend smashing guitars, Pete Townsend with feedback, Pete Townsend with distortion, Pete Townsend with the idea of inventing the Marshall stack, because, he said it needed to be louder because people weren't paying enough attention. So he's stacking the two Marshalls up, and that's kind of considered the birth of the Marshall stack, which is a big part of metal. But yeah, they had some heavy songs along the way. And also the Who, because Keith Moon was a very violent, all over the place drummer. He's really the precedent to Rat Scabies from The Damned kind of thing, and even John Entwistle with pretty distorted bass, and even Roger Daltrey with a pretty extreme shouty vocal with some vocal fries. So they're important for those reasons. And the last point I want to make on everything you just said is that a lot of this, the interesting debate around this topic depends on how old you are. So though for those guys, those who are 5 to 10 years older than me, those records sounded crazy, super heavy. But as you get older, someone my age will look at those and not be super impressed by them. Someone 10, 15 years younger than us have this whole discussion that metal starts. So not heavy metal, but metal, right? There's a whole, and I have a whole trilogy of books all on thrash that go through the entire birth of thrash. In fact, one of those books is really, the entire book is almost like who invented thrash in a way, right? So the idea, if you're much younger than us, you say, what is heavy metal? Who cares about heavy metal? Really, we're talking about metal. So when you shorten the term, for that, basically the birth of metal is Metallica, Kill 'Em All.
The birth of metal or birth of thrash?
The birth of metal.
Really?
Metal. I'm being a little cheeky here, but the idea of when young kids just call it metal, they're almost, it's the birth of both, right? It's the birth of thrash and the birth of metal. But the idea of this term metal really meaning kind of a modern version of metal that skips the entire 70s. That's kind of what I mean.
Yeah, because when we were growing up, AC/DC was metal.
Yeah,
they were metal.
I guess what I'm saying is as time goes on,
it gets diluted, right?
We seem to have slipped into this term metal as opposed to saying heavy metal every time, right?
Right.
And to me, metal almost means thrash and forward.
And going back to the Who for a second, Boris the Spider, not a very metal song, but the vocal wise, it's kind of like death metal a bit for that time. Wouldn't you agree?
Right. Yeah.
A lot of people would say One of These Days by Pink Floyd would be the first death metal vocal, but Boris the Spider is pretty guttural, if you ask me.
Yeah,
for the time,
Well, and when you think back even further, really, Twist and Shout is a very guttural thing, and a lot of guys in the 50s were like that as well. But yeah, Roger Daltrey and who else? Not Blue Cheer, not Hendrix, not Cream. Those are all very smooth sort of vocals. And as you get into Iggy Pop is actually not a very metal vocal either. Neither is MC5. In fact, so here's a funny thing. When I was a kid, the very first records I ever got, and I didn't know about heavy metal and didn't know that heavy metal is where I was going, and that was what I was naturally going to go to. I stumbled upon Creedence Clearwater Revival, Pendulum and Cosmos Factory, Steppenwolf Gold, and Three Dog Night, the live album. I guess that one doesn't matter. But those first two, not very heavy at all. But when I look back, I realized that John Fogerty had a really extreme vocal. And that's what was attracting me to CCR, even though they were kind of like a Chuglin band type, old-timey music band, right? But there was an extreme vocal there. John Kay had an extreme vocal. So quickly after that, I discovered metal, and I was into your Nazareths and Zeppelins and Sabbaths and Deep Purples and that. But again, and this goes back to what we talked about in the Metal Evolution series, all over the place, where we looked at all these different things. What I learned way later in life is that the extreme vocal is a pretty darn important thing that makes you think metal.
Right. And also, I never really noticed till I read in your book the drum solo on Toad from Cream was pretty much the first double bass. And I always thought of Simon Phillips on Descendant Aggressor as the first double bass, but no, I listened to that drum solo, and he does a lot of double bass work on that song Toad.
Yeah. So the idea with drums, there aren't a lot of real touchstones of what is metal drumming, but one of them, I guess, is double bass. So the book charts the history, and there isn't much, because it ends in 1971. It charts that history of double bass. But when I get into those other books, like that trilogy I did, Hit the Lights, Caught in a Mosh, Tornado of Souls, which, by the way, the first one's out of print, but I still have the other two available. But when the whole discussion about the history of thrash, that whole double bass thing becomes much more important. So you're right. There's Simon Phillips, there's Pat Travers, Hammerhead, Tommy Aldridge, and then the one that everybody talks about is Overkill. You know, Filthy Animal Taylor. It's got double bass all the way through, and then you've got things like Except Fast as a Shark. So you start seeing those double bass songs. You've got Rob Reiner from Anvil, leading up to you know, so double bass is much more important in thrash, or what we, I guess, just called metal, compared to, you know, all this stuff that happens in the 70s. But yeah, so a little bit of that history is charted throughout the book as well.
There recently there was a little controversy, not big. Carmine a piece saying that John Bonham borrowed a lot of stuff, but I remember watching years ago some footage of Vanilla Fudge where Carmine was doing stuff on drums that later, this was pre-Zeppelin, that John Bonham pretty much copied from him.
Yeah, John loved Carmine. Zeppelin backed up Vanilla Fudge. You know, Carmine was a great drummer. He's a great singer too, which is a really cool thing. But yeah, and you know, bought drums based on loving Carmine's kit and all that stuff. So you're right. I mean, he's pretty important in there too. But really, in this whole, you know, who invented heavy metal kind of question, right? It's drums are not a super important thing, I think, in the whole thing. It really is way more important. The most important thing, and my shortest definition of heavy metal that I can give when people ask, oh, what is heavy metal? The very shortest definition I can give is it needs to have guitar put through a distortion pedal. That's really it, right? More than anything. So the most important thing is guitar through a distortion pedal, and then what you do with it. And the two things you do with it that define heavy metal are power chords and riffs.
Yeah, and I think it was just a bubbling up factor to 1970, because right at the eve of it, on 1969, you had the first Stooges and you had the first Zeppelin. And Communication Breakdown, I mean, that alone. But then you had, you know, the bluesy Shook Me and all that stuff that kind of dilutes it to not being a full-fledged metal album. Where the first Sabbath, I mean, even though it does have its blues element, it remains heavy the all way through, except for maybe Sleeping Village, which is just a little acoustic piece. But we both are in agreement that, like, when he's like, I like to title this video, Who Invented Heavy Metal and Why Is It Black Sabbath? You know, right. Because it is definitely Black Sabbath. Now, Tony Iommi, you know, the king of the riffs, like, you know, everybody says everybody got a piece of Black Sabbath. And if you have a metal collection, no matter what genre of metal it is, there is Tony Iommi's fingerprints all over it. And a lot of people, this is where I like to bring up Symptom of the Universe is the first thrash riff.
So yeah, just to go back, who invented heavy metal and why is it Black Sabbath? One of the reasons is albums to me are important. You have to have an album to be the inventor of metal. Now, going back, just to recap, I think Are You Experienced is important. I think There's No Cream album that's important. I think the first two Blue Cheer albums are important. I think the first Stooges is important, and MC5 Kick Out the Jams is very important. Now, Zeppelin doesn't really have an album, and that's why I leave them out, but they do have, like you say, Communication Breakdown, and they also have, before 1970, Whole Lotta Love, Livin', Lovin', Made, super important songs. Dazed and Confused, How Many More Times. They have quite a bit. They have almost an album's worth of this stuff. But even all of that combined isn't as impressive in terms of moving the ball forward that Black Sabbath does on that first album.
Would you also put Who Live at Leeds there with the live MC5 and so on?
Yeah, everybody brings that one up, and I would say no, because I always think live albums are cheating in a way, and that's got not a lot of songs, and I think there's either 2 or 3 covers on it as well. But even that that is impressive, because it tells you the links to the fact that there are some things that are actual true old blues songs that can be made super heavy and sound quite heavy, right? So it is Young Man Blues, right? Is that the cover? Yeah. And there's another cover there too, right?
Summertime. No, not that.
That might be on there too. Or there's another blues. Anyways, to me, that fits in the accidental category. It's accidentally quite heavy, and it's even more accidentally and cheating heavy because it's a live album. So yeah, but it does get brought up quite often as well.
Well, going back to Symptom of the Universe, what predates that is Stone Cold Crazy from Queen. I mean,
well, even Ralph, I mean, there's not a big difference between Symptom of the Universe and Paranoid even. So Paranoid is late 1970s, so it's kind of the same thing. And it's not that much of an advancement over Communication Breakdown. The one thing it does have that Paranoid and Communication Breakdown don't have is the tritone, the Diablos in Musica, the doom. But Sabbath themselves already established that across 5 previous albums, and lots of times even on the first album. So I know what you're getting at. People always bring that song up, but I'm not sure that the pieces weren't already there all over the place anyways, and a lot of those pieces were with Sabbath.
Yeah, I mean, but Queen had like Organ Battle and which you could, label also as thrashy. Yeah, I mean, yes, I never really thought of Paranoid because it does have the crunchy riff. But
Fireball, Deep Purple Fireball is, talked about at length in the book, because I do kind of cheat and go past the first Sabbath album, because I want to say the accidental part is over with. If you thought any of this was accidental, Deep Purple in Rock, super important, Uriah Heep one. But so I do go to 1971, and I only bring that up to say Fireball, out of all the songs, out of all the songs that are super old, I would pick Fireball as the first thrash song.
Yeah, you are correct. And but would you say In Rock would be the first metal album if it came out a couple months before the first Sabbath as the first?
Absolutely, Ralph. Totally agree with you on that. And I do make that point in the book. I think of the 4 albums that are the cornerstones of the invention of heavy metal in 1970. So it's Sabbath 1, In Rock, Uriah Heep, Very Heavy, Very Humble, and Black Sabbath, Paranoid. The heaviest one of all those is Deep Purple in Rock. And so I think that would, if it had come out first, but that's coming out in the middle of the year. And Black Sabbath 1 is coming out Friday the 13th, February the 13th, 1970. So it's super early. And, I make pains to make the point that, Sabbath was playing a lot of this material through 69 as well. So they're inventing it in the air at that point, and then they're official, on Friday the 13th.
Was Deep Purple in Rock recorded before the first Black Sabbath, or? Well, I mean,
no, I don't think so. I don't believe so. No, because there is a 6-month difference there. I'm pretty sure I go through that in the book, but no, because even the first Sabbath was recorded pretty much. I think it was late 60s. Even that's pinpointed, because that's a super important point, right? But no, I don't believe so. And then yeah, Sabbath proves their mastery, no pun intended, through Paranoid and Master of Reality. And I kind of make the cheeky point in the book that, by the time we're comparing Master of Reality in 71 to Deep Purple Fireball, there's no contest at all. Master of Reality is a bludgeoningly heavy album.
With my favorite, that's my favorite band, and my favorite song would be Children of the Grave. I just think that song is just so perfect. It's my favorite Sabbath song. And a lot of people would say Megalomania, because a lot of people would be like to, which I love. Megalomania would be my second favorite, but you know how people are. Children of the Grave is too popular. It can't be my favorite. You know what I'm saying? And but yeah.
Well, Ralph, I was doing some research on greatest riffs of all time, and somebody said the opening riff to Into the Void is the greatest riff of all time. You can't argue that, man. No. That is pretty unbelievable, right?
Oh yeah.
So and that record, I know it's got the a few little mellow bits to it, but I would say that record is probably the heaviest record of 1970 and 71 combined.
Oh yeah, no, it's and it didn't that start the down tuning
Exactly. That's
with the
important too.
first one, right?
And a lot of tritone on it too.
Yeah, there's a lot of tritone, and yeah, I mean, I think it only has one little mellow spot.
Well, it's got Embryo as an intro, Orchid is an intro, and then Solitude is the mellow song. So, and it doesn't have a lot of songs. So when you do that, and you look at the songs, you go, oh, there's mellow stuff, but it doesn't add up to much. And it's creepy, cool, mellow. Anyways.
Yeah, of course. Well, yeah, that is the point. I mean, so we both are in agreement. It wasn't Blue Cheer. It was Black Sabbath, the inventors of metal.
Yeah.
Well, Martin, I mean, this has been great. I would love to have you back on my show. And also, I don't know what your schedule's like on weekends, because my co-host on the Rock and Metal Combat podcast is like such a huge fan of yours. The Heavy Metal Guide, is that one of your books? The Guide to Heavy Metal?
Well, sort of, yeah. Collector's Guide to Heavy Metal is a 4-book series of reviews. That's kind of what started it all off. So,
yeah, he says he has one that the pages are falling apart and he still reads it till today. And
we could set something up at some point, sure.
Yeah, and we were talking about doing Master Reality. So maybe it'd be great to have you on the show to talk about that album.
Okay.
Everybody check out this book. It's a fascinating read, not only about who invented heavy metal, but all the origins of metal that I didn't touch up on all of them because I don't want to spoil it all, but it really, I mean, you really do pinpoint a lot of the very integral parts of metal, and amazing book. And I want to thank you again, Martin, for being
all right, man. Yeah, very cool. This was a lot of fun.
Yes. All right. So we will talk offline about when we can schedule in a podcast.
Sounds good.
Master Reality. So have a great day, Martin. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay. Thank you, Ralph. See ya.